This is Red Pole Q here, and as usual, I am with
McConnell.
And in Shanghai, we have
Kane.
And today, we're going to talk about Neil Strauss's book, The Truth.
It's like this, yo. This is 10% luck, 20% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, and 100% reason to remember the name.
So, if you're familiar with our podcast, you should be familiar with the book, The Game. And more recently, he wrote the book, The Truth, about his struggles with having relationships. So apparently before that, he couldn't, although in The Game, it seems like he could. But apparently he couldn't.
Well, he definitely thought he had problems with relationships in The Truth.
Right.
Whether he did or not is questionable.
Well, I guess that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this.
Yeah. And Martin and I just actually finished listening to a very interesting podcast that he did last month, actually, with some former volleyball player who has a podcast. I don't know anything about this girl. I just know from listening to the Neil Strauss podcast.
She shags like a minx.
I bet she shags like a minx.
Well, we don't know for sure, but maybe. Anyway, we listened to this podcast, and it was pretty interesting because I guess this is the first time he has publicly spoken about his divorce, maybe?
That's what the Wikipedia page said.
Right.
It's also kind of weird that the first time he would talk about it is to a volleyball player.
Volleyball player, fashion model, actress.
Yeah.
So, is it really that weird?
Yeah. Actually, the podcast was really great because Neil was doing all these DHVs, and he was doing all these like mystery method style routines in the podcast, and it was really great. It was a great example of how Neil still does pick up whether he thinks he is or not.
Yeah, and it was actually really awesome to listen to.
Yeah. I definitely wanted to use some of his routines myself. He had one sick routine where he was like, oh, my ex-wife, she recently met this guy. He's actually a fan of my work. And, maybe they're dating now. Really good. Love a good sloppy seconds framing.
Oh, man. So we actually read this book as part of the book club. That Pickup Asia has a book club for guys who have done programs. And we did this book probably a year ago, maybe.
Yeah, about a year ago.
And, I thought it was a very good book. I mean, Neil's a great writer, and he's really funny, wacky.
And very honest about his wacky lifestyle. So,
right.
Or at least, I mean, he at least will share some very funny stories.
Yes, there's some version of honesty.
Yeah.
Is the point. And so we'd always intended to do a podcast about it, but we didn't get around to it. But we had a very fun, vigorous, exciting, enjoyable, thought-provoking conversation when we did the book club call.
We're going to have another one right now.
Yeah, we are. Okay, so I actually took some notes about this. Wow, imagine that. Maybe these notes were originally for the book club call, but, we'll reuse them like we do with sex toys. Okay, so the book is divided up into several parts, and the first part is about cheating and rehab. So the idea in the beginning of the book is that he's dating Ingrid, and he has issues having a relationship with her where he doesn't sleep with other women. And she basically says, look, if you don't get over this thing about sleeping with other women, then I'm not going to stay with you. And he decides, well, I'll do whatever it takes to stay with this girl because she's really great and there's nothing wrong with her. And she gives me everything. Yeah, so I thought that this book was a very American book in terms of its frames about sex and relationships.
Well, I thought so too. I don't know about Kane.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the whole thing was very, very American.
So it's a very American book in terms of its ideas around sex and sexuality. And that really weirded me out quite a lot. So, first of all, the Americans have this idea that if you love someone, then you won't be interested in other people, which is just bizarre. And there's so much science to say that that's just not how it works.
Yeah. And I think like one of the most interesting things is the book kind of starts off with Neil hanging out with Rick Rubin. Nice DHV, Neil Strauss. Always nice.
For those of you who don't know, a DHV stands for display of high value. And it's basically anything that you do that shows that you are a person of status. Yeah, there you go. Anyway,
yeah,
continue.
so he was like, hanging out with Rick Rubin, and Rick Rubin's talking about how, Neil has this cheating problem, quote unquote problem. And I think it's really funny that someone who is in the entertainment industry, and not just in the entertainment industry, but one of like the major figures in the entertainment industry, he probably sees what people are like and what their relationships are like. And, it's just very interesting that he thinks this is a problem.
And presumably when he signs people on, he would advise them about how to handle their finances with their marriage and kids and stuff. I mean, if he's any kind of responsible person who cares about his artists, and he seems to be someone like that, that would definitely be a part of the conversation.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just very weird to me that he had that stance.
Yeah, for sure. So that was the first thing that I thought was really odd because, in Asia, they don't have these kind of illusions. That's very, very, common for people to understand that, hey, when you get married to someone and you've been with them, that, you're not going to be necessarily sexually attracted to them. You might be, you might not be. And, either is basically fine because the whole point of the being together is to do the family thing, not to do the sex thing. And so sometimes people will do the sex thing elsewhere, or a lot of the time people will do the sex thing elsewhere, and that goes for, wives stepping out or husbands stepping out. It goes both ways. So that's sort of really interesting that, people, that Americans can continue to have such extreme naivete around human nature. And
I guess they also like take relationships and infidelity and divorce like really, really seriously. Like comparatively, I mean, not to say that those things can't cause problems in relationships, because they definitely can, and they do. But I remember when I first moved to Japan, I was watching a variety show at one of my favorite restaurants. They would always play like Japanese variety TV. And they were doing this skit because I guess some famous CEO or something was dating this famous actress. And then they separated. And they did a skit of what caused them to separate. And it was like a joke that the actress was playing a zombie, like in a zombie movie. But she like started to act like a zombie in real life. And the guy was like all scared. And I thought this was so funny. And I was like, oh, is this just like a normal skit? And my coworkers at the time explained that, oh, no.
Who were Japanese.
Yeah, who were Japanese. They were like, oh, no, this is like a normal thing that they'll do on these variety shows where they'll just make fun of it because they think it's funny. And I was like, oh, this is really great. And I think there's just like a lightheartedness that people will take towards those kinds of things instead of being like reprehensible. I'm referencing was that Bill Burr?
Bill Burr.
Yeah,
absolutely reprehensible behavior.
Bill Burr when he talks about great men.
All my heroes are going down.
Yeah. So that's the first thing that struck me about the book, and I guess about Neil Strauss. Now I suspect that he was dramatizing for the purposes of the book because, let's just say the Neil Strauss in the game and the Neil Strauss in the truth are very different people. And if you allow me to DHV myself by saying, we have we know a few people who have spent time with Neil Strauss in the recent times. And, they say that he's basically just like he always was. I mean, the way he always was in the game.
I mean, listening to that podcast we just listened to, he's still the way he was in the game, actually.
Right.
It's funny that Neil apparently dislikes Tyler so much. Because I actually think there's a lot of commonalities between them in terms of like how they play media using pickup, the tools they learned in pickup to play mainstream media to their favor.
Sure, but it's very possible he just doesn't like Tyler because of how he did Mystery bad.
Oh yeah, sure. I think that's definitely a factor, but I also just think it's kind of comical.
Yeah. So then the next thing that I thought was really weird when I was reading this book, but I know is really normal in the U.S. and a lot of Western guys get upset about this in Asia too, is that Neil talks about being really annoyed with how long Ingrid takes to get ready to go out, and that is, it's shocking to me. I mean, I think I want the girls to take as long as they fucking need or as long as they want.
I mean, maybe that's a subtle DHV on Neil Strauss's part, because he's like, I can go get anything I want right now. So yeah, just go out to the club, do some pickup.
So I think this is a major issue with a lot of guys in the West and people in general, but in guys in the West, they get annoyed with the girl they're dating because she takes a long time to get ready, and then they also get upset about her not being hot enough.
Do they get upset about her not being hot enough? I think it's common in the West for guys not to care.
Don't they get annoyed about like girls not being not look? They don't care. They don't care.
So. I think that people's standards in the West are just a lot lower. So I think they're just like satisfied with.
Oh, really? So they're just like, yeah, it's fine if she doesn't look that good.
Yeah, really? I think so. Like one of my, I was talking to a guy that I know from the States pretty recently, and he was like, oh. I asked him how his relationship is going, and he's like, sometimes I'm really into her, sometimes I'm not, And I was just like, what? So I think it's maybe kind of normal.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's a mistake. They shouldn't be doing that.
I think it largely depends on where they are too, because there's definitely places where your options are extremely, extremely limited. So if your pool is very limited and your experiences aren't very broad, then you don't really have much of a perspective. Whereas for us living in Asia, I mean, you walk down the street for like 5-10 minutes and you see some decent looking chick
who's done up, so she looks really hot.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that decent looking chick looks hot. And you're like, this is great.
Pretty much.
It's like everyone is raising their level up 1 or 2 points. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, but I mean, in the West, it's like if no one is doing that, then no one feels incentivized to do that. So,
but what about all of the people talking about the incredible like pressure from the beauty standards, society's beauty standards?
Yeah, I always wonder where they're getting this pressure from. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused too. I mean, if the guys are like, hey, no, you look great, let's just get out of here. And when I was in New York last time, I sent you guys that picture from the Lane Bryant ad. I think that's what it's called. Lane Bryant. Is that the name of the?
I can't remember.
It's a store for plus-sized models.
Plus-size models.
And let me just say that billboard was huge. And wow, I mean, I don't know what they're talking about when they're talking about the impossible beauty standards of the West.
So I think guys feel this pressure from Western media that like, oh, I'm supposed to accept her the way she is, and I'm just supposed to like the way she is by default, whether or not she puts in effort or whether or not she looks like this or looks like that. So I think even there's probably like some kind of internal friction in a lot of guys' heads in the West, I imagine.
And then people wonder why Western guys are addicted to porn.
Well, I
why
think
they have a hard time getting it up for their girl. Sorry, go ahead, Kane.
I think that the basis of it is actually romance and all of the romantic stories that are encoded into the culture when they're kids. So as they're growing up, they learn these kind of set of rules as to how you're supposed to view the opposite sex and what's right and what's wrong. One of the big ones being you should accept someone for who they are if you really love them, right? And
yeah,
I mean, that plus with some good bouts of shame about liking sex in certain ways or thinking certain things about sex that men seem to get, where women these days kind of have more of a free pass on because of the whole feminist movement from, I'd say, probably the 70s or 80s onwards. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that men in the West are kind of fucked on both angles. Because in most parts of Asia, being like a really sexual guy here, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing from a cultural standpoint, because it's not even a thing. Like, girls just expect it. It's just expected that the dude is going to try and bang the chick. And there's no alternative. That's just how it is.
Right.
So I think they're a lot more practical. And the West, due to various reasons like economic success and other kind of retarded stuff, they've had this opportunity to take on a whole bunch of delusion that isn't healthy in lots of ways. And that's led to the whole, there's 60 million genders and you can identify as a fucking helicopter and all this other shit. That just wouldn't fly in Asia, because they would be like, well, how much money do you have and do you have a good job? Because we don't care about that shit. Get that out of here.
Oh, man, that was good. Yeah, actually, that was something that was interesting from the podcast, was he said that we live in a post-consent world. And he said that, like, the first step was, okay, you have to ask for consent. But now we're at the point where asking for consent can be considered sexual harassment. So now, you know, that's why apps are so popular, or, you know, dating apps are so popular. Because, you know, Neil Strauss was having dinner with one of the founders of one of the biggest, most popular dating sites, apparently. And this guy was saying that after reading the game, he thought, wow, that's a lot of work. And so because of that, that's why he decided to start this dating site. Nice DHV there, Neil. Hashtag thanks mystery.
He was saying the pickup process is a lot of work, or what in particular?
Yeah. The process of learning pickup and doing pickup is so much hard work. So, and so what he was saying, what Neil Strauss was saying in the interview, was that the whole idea of the apps is that everybody is opting in to having a possible romantic interaction. Whereas, you know, I guess with other situations, you kind of have to ask them at some point, like, hey, do you want to have a romantic interaction? And that's where that is now considered sexual harassment, or can be considered sexual harassment, whereas before it wasn't. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Another interesting thing that he talked about regarding dating apps was that the dating app companies are incentivized to keep you using the app, because that's how they monetize the entire business is monetized through people paying for subscriptions and paying for boosts, for instance, and those kind of like tools that you get on the app. And you know, it's the same model as like mobile games, right? Where, you know, the most successful mobile games, you can't beat them. You can only just keep playing them because they want you to keep playing them. And he was saying that these companies are incentivized to keep people on the app, keep them single essentially, and then keep playing the app. And I think that's interesting because, you know, this is one of the reasons why pickup as an industry is a bad industry, because when you teach guys to do cold approach, then they can go and have like relationships, and then they're just like, okay, well, my life is a lot better now and I can just keep doing this. And, you know, you don't have any subscription model necessarily.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you know, that's similar to, I was reading this book written by a therapist, and, you know, she basically said the same thing. The problem with therapy is, as a business or a profession, is that you succeed when you stop making money. Yeah. But I think that in this case, the personal relationship you have with that person, assuming you're not a sociopath or psychopath, assuming you're not a psychopath, that personal relationship you have with them means that even though from a financial perspective, your incentives are not aligned, from the perspective of that personal relationship, they are aligned. So I think that's why it works out. But, you know, obviously you don't have any personal relationship with the owners of the Tinder and Bumble and Grindr.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Grindr is probably the app that's most aligned with its users' intentions, right?
Oh, that's,
you know,
probably
guys
true.
are just horny, so they just want to have a lot of sex.
Right. And in Korea, you know, apparently most of these guys have girlfriends already. So,
all right, and the Pickup Asia award to most honest dating app is Grindr.
Do you guys know which country is the majority stakeholder in Grindr.
You mean which has the customers, or do you mean the owners, or?
I mean the owners, the people who own the most shares.
I suspect that they are located in the country that has the city Paris.
Nope.
Oh, where?
Have another guess. It'll be quite shocking.
Oh, okay. Are we going to have to go to the Middle Eastern world?
No, it's not that shocking. It's a lot closer.
Malaysia.
Nope.
Thailand?
Nope.
China.
Yep.
China.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow. I mean, you got to keep the one-child policy going somehow. Oh, wait, they don't have that anymore.
But the interesting thing, that being gay was classified as a mental disorder until I think 97 and was outlawed for a certain period of time, I think. Can't remember if that's 100% correct.
It's kind of ironic because, you see more, and at least, if you compare the other East Asian countries, Japan and Korea, you see by far the most homosexuality happening in China.
Yeah, I guess.
Most openly.
Yeah, I mean, there's potentially a few reasons for that. It could be due to a lot more childhood trauma, assuming that has something to do with it. It's possible. I don't know. I'm not an expert on being gay. I'm not even at the base level of knowledge at being gay. I have no experience in that. But I think with China in particular, they have such a mix of people and situations. You're bound to get a bunch of weird stuff going. I think in terms of Grindr, the biggest thing, though, would have been that it was some sort of like sneaky tech move. So instead of them caring about what the app's for, they just want access to the data on US phones or worldwide phones.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, go China.
Yeah. I also thought it was pretty funny that Neil was talking about how he uses dating apps. And I imagine that it must just be incredibly easy for Neil Strauss since he's famous. And I was joking with Red Bull Q that I wonder if Neil has like a verified check mark on his Tinder profile so they can tell it's the real Neil Strauss.
Well, I'm wondering, I mean, does he really use dating apps? That doesn't make any sense. He could just have people introduced, he can go and be introduced to people. He's in the music industry. He knows everyone at Rolling Stone. I mean.
Well, maybe he needs somewhere to source his easy layups. I mean, he's got like the quality, Rolling Stone introductions, and then he has the easy layups.
Right. Yeah, could be. Okay, so getting back to the book, there was this whole discussion about sex addiction, and this whole part because he went to this rehab center for people with sex addiction, and this whole section was super weird.
Yeah, probably the most disturbing part was that. That place definitely cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a major scam.
Right. Yeah, it was really confusing because they basically seemed to say that if you are enjoying sex in any way outside of the intimacy aspects of it, then you're a sex addict. Like they were saying, if you masturbate, if you like porn, it's like, or if, you have sex for fun, then, you're a sex addict. And that was really confusing.
One of the highlights for this was, I'm not an addiction specialist, but if you're cheating on your relationship, if you're visiting porn sites, or if you're masturbating, that's sex addiction. And the most retarded thing about that is that monkeys whack off, right? So, I mean, if monkeys are going to do it, it's probably a normal thing. I mean, yeah, it is just ridiculous because, I mean, so many kids grow up not knowing how to do any of this stuff, and they figure it out on their own, and they're not sex addicts. So, yeah, I think it's kind of insane. It was a very kind of narrow, if you are adhering to the, I don't know, maybe extreme Christian view of what's acceptable, then you're okay. Other than that, you're a bad person.
Right. So just to be clear, I am not particularly a fan of masturbation, and I think a lot of guys, they ruin their ability to enjoy sex with women because they masturbate a lot and because they watch a lot of porn. And, we've seen a lot of this in guys that have come through our programs where it takes them some time to get to be able to enjoy sex with women in the way that they want to because they've, watched a lot of porn and masturbated a lot. But I don't think this is a problem of sex addiction. I just think this is a problem of not being able to enjoy sex as much as you want to. And also the fact that your sexual enjoyment is sort of linked more towards porn and masturbation than it is to women makes it harder for guys to develop relationships, because a big driver of guys developing relationships with women is sex. So I think a lot of mainstream world has this kind of wrong where they sort of think that the driver should be that you want to have a relationship, but that's not how it works. How it works is, guys are like, wow, that girl's hot. I want to bang her. And then you in the process of trying to do that, you get to know her and you're like, oh, after the banging, I think I could keep her around.
I mean, this kind of feeds into the general narcissism and romanticizing of Western culture, though, because I'm not going to say the more feminine it gets, it's like this, but it does seem to be the case, because you've got a bunch of chicks that have this romantic ideal that's been played to them through various movies, TV shows, songs, all this shit throughout their life, right? And then once they get to an age where they can effectively start dating and meeting people, they have a decent amount of choice because they're chicks. Society tells them they're great in all these different ways, and it makes it so that basically that's the ideal they want, and society is being shaped around that.
Yeah, totally. And so they have this idea that, guys are going to be primarily interested in them for their intellect or their career or, something else. And, it's just like you need that primary base driver. I mean, that's kind of what, biologically, that's what it's all about. And then a lot of the other, and, if you read any evolutionary psychology books, especially ones like the one by Frans de Waal, Our Inner Ape, where he talks about chimpanzees and bonobos. Kane and I did some couple discussions about that last year. So you can find that in our previous podcast episodes. And anyway, but in talking about that, there's a lot of discussion about how a lot of the ways that humans have developed in terms of biologically, mentally, is around this, women wanting to keep that male partner around longer so that they can participate and contribute more in the child rearing. And so it's like the procreation came first, and then all of the other developmental aspects of, let's say being artistic, intelligence, being humorous, all those things developed to help women retain that male after he delivered the sperm packet.
And, another thing to think about is that any guy who is interested in a girl primarily for her career and her intellect and her personality and all of that stuff, who doesn't care about the sexual aspect, is not going to be the kind of guy the girl is going to be attracted to or want to bang. It's like, yeah.
Asexual men are not attractive.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the next thing that I thought was that weirded me out about this book is, there's just a lot of discussion, and even in the podcast, there was a lot of discussion about trauma. And what weirded me out is when I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, yeah, all this stuff happens to people, but essentially if all this stuff happens to people, that's not trauma. That's just being human. It's like,
yeah, definitely.
Okay. You have a parent who hates you. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's great if that doesn't happen, but it happens so incredibly frequently. That is largely how humans have lived through a big chunk of their existence. So this whole idea of trauma is everybody's damaged. It's like, yeah, everybody's damaged. That's what makes you normal.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's another interesting thing, because I wonder if this is a mainstream trend, because Tyler has this in a lot of his newer videos since they sort of revamped their YouTube channel, the RSD YouTube channel. He talks a lot about oh, that's your trauma talking, or you have all this trauma, and he's calling this out. And I wonder if this is just that's the psychology trend in the West right now, is oh, everyone's damaged goods, and if you're damaged goods, then pay me money and I can help you. And it's a genius tactic for the reason that Redful Q just mentioned. It's And that's everyone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really bizarre. I mean, I think all of us on this podcast can all point to, well, I mean, we didn't get into the pickup community because we had it all together, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
And right. And I mean, and I don't think, and then the people that aren't in the pickup community, most of them, it's not because they have it together either.
Yeah. I mean, in most cases, they just haven't realized that they don't have it together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
It's held together with like bubble gum and rubber bands, and they just don't know it yet.
Hey, some of them you're using duct tape.
Yeah. Also, it's either that they're like way too egotistical about the situation and then delusional to want to perceive they're not together, or they've got it like together enough that they don't feel dissatisfied to do anything. Like some of the guys you referred to, where that guy was like, "I'm not that into her at the moment." Someone mentioned this guy like about 20 minutes ago.
Oh, I don't think we were talking about a specific person. I think we were just talking in general. Oh, yeah.
Grinder?
Oh, no, you were talking about your friend who said he's not always into his girl.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so that.
Kane on point. Oh, yeah. And that reminded me, Kane, you talked to a guy maybe a month or two ago who lives in Beijing. And he, we've known him for a while and he never did any of our programs. And then you said that something about him being in a relationship and having like all these problems that he wouldn't be having if he'd just like done our programs before, right?
Oh, yeah. He actually hit me up again today.
Yeah. So he's an example of one of these people who, because they have it together enough,
pretty much
they just don't take action, right?
He's successful enough to fail rather than failing enough to be successful.
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting way to say it.
Yeah, because
I think that's like the most accurate way to describe naturals.
Right.
He's like good looking enough and got enough of a good situation in terms of money and meeting women to get enough options to be generally happy. But then at the same time, a lot of the situations he's happy with are situations I'd look at and be like, why are you happy with this? But they are arguably better than not having any situations.
Right.
Well,
you're like, bro, you got maggots on your food. And he's like, whatever. You're like, but you could like have food that doesn't have maggots on it. He's like,
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is another problem with the way that the dating world has evolved in the last, 10 to 15 years. And it's a lot easier to have, something now. You can have some results, but you maybe, that because you have some results, that means you won't be motivated to get the best results. Whereas before, if you were like a loser, it's like you weren't getting anything. And when you like read the game or you read, even before that, read Usenet or something, you were just like, holy shit. You were like, I can do something about this. And, there was only one developmental path, basically.
right.
Now it's like, just install these apps and you can at least have the illusion that you're doing well.
Or the illusion that you're doing something.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's true too, right? Because, guys can, even if they're not having much success, they can get on Tinder and they can just start swiping and they can feel like they're doing something to fix their dating lives.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, they kind of are doing better just because they are skipping the part that was like the first major obstacle to them, which is the approach, obviously.
Right. Sure. I mean, but that is true. They are doing something. But I mean, a lot of the times it's not really going to be enough to move them forward, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
That's like one of the really sad things about the direction that pickup is sort of headed. And that's, because guys can put these Band-Aid solutions on, they don't have to actually develop themselves that much. Because, the problem with Tinder is you can just swipe without ever feeling rejection. Whereas if you learn cold approach, the process of being rejected is very helpful. And it's like very therapeutic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. As Jordan Peterson would say, there's women pointing at you and saying, you are not adequate. You are inadequate. And you should do something about that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then moving on, there's a bunch of discussion about attachment styles, and we won't get into that. But I've wondered, and I'm not the only one who has wondered about the idea of attachment styles and how valid it actually is. And really attachment styles might be something else, but he does talk about them. And, we won't talk about them on this call, but maybe we should talk about that at some point. That could be clever for us. Yeah, we should do that.
We could do like a call where we talk about attachment styles and then also like speculate on what kind of big 5 traits they could be associated with or something. That'd be pretty interesting.
Sure. Yeah, that would be good. Okay. We should write that down somewhere.
Yeah, but yeah, I think like, and then, you're talking about him going to the sex rehab center. And in the beginning of the book, it's really uncomfortable to read because you're just like, what are you doing, man? Like, you're wasting all this time, all this money. Like, what's going on? I get, but the good thing is that Neil does realize that it's kind of a scam.
Right.
And he's like, okay, well, how can I actually get the most value out of this without like buying into the dogma that they're trying to like, instill in us? And so that at that point, the book starts getting really, really good.
Right. Yeah, the beginning part is so incredible.
So I would recommend if anyone actually wants to read this book, which I think you should read it. I think especially if you really like Neil's writing and you like the game, it's a pretty good read. But the beginning, it will be painful if you're someone who's been through the pickup community and you are familiar with, the game.
Right.
But it does start to get really interesting after he realizes that. And then he kind of like swings to the opposite end of the spectrum where he just goes like absolutely crazy and having all these like non-monogamous relationships and everybody licking pussy and shit, threesomes, foursomes.
But before I get into that, there was something that Kane and I, were particularly shocked about on the original call. And I mean, I'm not saying everybody else who was on the call wasn't also shocked, but it was really weird. So supposedly, Neil did all of this training with, what was that guy? Steve P. of White Tiger Tantra.
Yeah, the sex expert guy.
Remember the guy with like the hat?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I'm just trying to remember what you're
right.
referencing.
So no, not in this book. I mean, in the game, he talks about doing that.
Yeah. I thought you were referencing the
Yeah. No, I mean in the book, The Game, he talks about doing that. And then in this book, he has sex with Ingrid and she doesn't come. Like, what is going on there? I was like, whoa, wait, whoa, what's
Yeah, I wonder, you have to wonder a lot whether or not that's what's actually going on or whether it was just for emphasis or what, because I was confused by that too. Yeah, I remember the part you're talking about now.
Yeah, like he came, like after he got out of rehab and he's like, let's get back together.
I mean, it could be that he was just trying to emphasize that he like wasn't that attracted to her for whatever combination of reasons. And so he didn't feel any incentive to to perform well.
Right.
But that wasn't really explicitly stated. And I think he wasn't really doing much justice to his true fans who had read his previous work. Because I'm sure they were all confused.
And the other thing was he was talking about how he had to fantasize about another girl so he could bust it.
Yeah.
So I thought that's pretty weird. I mean, I'm not saying I've never been in that situation before. Actually, no, I've never been in that situation before. My mind has wandered off. That's happened, but it wasn't like a deliberate thing.
Yeah, I wondered if that was it was like he was dramatizing it for effect. I did wonder about that. But maybe it's just like because I've never done that either. I feel like it's just maybe that's just not me, and other people do that.
And I would also like to say that in my case, when my mind has wandered off, and I've noticed that, I was like, oh, okay, that's something that I'm not managing my situation with this girl very well if that's happening. And so either so I then took action to like fix that, whether that was changing up the way I interact with that particular girl, whether that was realizing, oh, this definitely isn't the girl for me, or whether that meant dealing with issues with whoever it was that I was thinking about.
That also reminds me of, there's like a part, on the earlier half of the book where like, I think it's like Ingrid leaves and then he like wants to watch porn like while she's gone. And this reminded, because we have a client who was like this, who had this really hot girlfriend. And she was like living with him, I think. And she would like leave and he would get all excited that he could look at porn because she was gone. And we were like, well, are you not attracted to her? He's like, no, she's super hot. She's super hot. And I was just like, what's what's going on? It's really strange. And I think that's, if we have clients like that, we're always trying to workshop them and be like, okay, well, what's the gap between what's going on in your sex life and what's going on in porn you're watching or fantasies that you have, and then try to resolve that gap.
Right.
And I think that's what Jordan Peterson would also suggest, given his, proclivity towards costumes. And
right. Yeah. He spends a lot of time talking about how he and Tammy had to work through these things.
Buy something sexy for your partner to wear, maybe multiple things.
Yeah. But I think that was an interesting part of the book where Neil's like, okay, I'm doing this, so there's something wrong with me, so let me disengage from my relationship and go into sex therapy. Instead of just being like, okay, well, maybe we should work on this a little more and try to make the sex better.
Yeah. Did you have any comments about that, Kane? I thought you would say something about the fact that, this part of the book, because I remember your explosive disdain for this, him not making Ingrid come in the book when we had the discussion originally.
He probably wasn't doing the chokey.
I don't actually remember having explosive disdain at all. I'm not saying I didn't, but I just don't remember this because it was a while back.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Do you want me to comment on Neil's sexual failings or which section of it? Because there was quite a lot.
Oh, no. Any section. We're always happy to have more Kane.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that part of it is definitely set up in a way for business because Neil's a businessman. Beyond that, I would say that Neil probably is more fucked up than we would think, and that we probably don't view that very clearly because we admire some of the other parts of him.
Right.
So,
well, it's interesting because I think this is one of the reasons why Neil was such a hero for a lot of guys, the way he frames himself in the game, because you can look at him and be like, oh, he's a loser just like me, and he did all this great stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, the thing that actually confuses me the most about this is that there isn't really a mental disorder called sex addiction. So you can be addicted to extreme or damaging behaviors that cause damage to your family or life, etc., etc. And that could be a bunch of different things, but it's not specifically about sex. It's usually about something deeper. So for him to go into rehab to get treatment for something which he would know, it's all just very, very weird, especially considering if you read the book and you see the first half. I mean, it's just psychotic. If you didn't have any experience and you were deeply religious, I could see how you would be kind of bamboozled into going along with a lot of the stuff that happened in the first part of the book. But overall, it's just insane that he's staying there. And to me, it more seems like he was doing it the same way he did all the crazy shit in his survival book.
Emergency.
Yeah.
Great book, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really good.
Yeah, but I think that when Neil's doing that, I really felt like he was doing all of that because he was
going to write a book.
That's bingo. I mean, that's part of it. But also I think that Neil was sort of looking at, okay, well, this is the box, the Western, healthy relationship box, and I need to fit into that box. And I don't fit into it right now, so how can I force myself to do that? And I think that's just a function of all the societal pressure that you probably get in the West to fit that mold.
Right. You can't even date girls that are significantly younger than you.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I think was really funny is how he made this whole thing about his parents, this really big. So there's two parts actually, right? Because in the beginning of the book, he makes it primarily about kind of a sexual thing. And then later on in the book, he makes it more about other aspects of the relationship between his parents. But in the beginning part, there's this whole thing about how, his dad had this secret, fetish for girls with disabilities or something. And then his mom had a disability and how this was really bad. And his mom was really ashamed or something. And this really confused me. Because from my perspective, I'm okay, isn't that exactly what you want? You have a disability and then you have and then you find a guy who for him, that's a turn on. Cause I had a friend and he had this weird thing where he liked when women had some kind of skin blemish or something like that. And so so he ended up marrying this girl who had like a pretty large dark patch on like her chin and neck. And it's like, great. It's like, why is this a bad thing? This seems good, but somehow this was like negative. It's like, if I meet a girl who happens to like guys with dark skin, I'm not like, oh, she's fetishizing me. I'm just like, oh, awesome. There's one more thing that she can like about me over another girl.
Yeah, so I think
definitely.
Again, it comes down to the thing I mentioned before, which is that there's a lot of shame associated with sex, and also that certain areas of society are using that shame as a tool to kind of moderate the behavior of other areas.
What do you mean?
Well, okay, so why is there demonizing of older men going for younger women in the West? As in, if you're like 35, you're going to get shamed for being with a 20-year-old. Why?
You're asking the wrong person.
Well, it's quite clear. You've got a bunch of women who also have power over the media and all these other things, and they don't want to have no options, basically. So
yeah, they shame them so that they have more dating options when they're like 30.
Yeah, and they've got to maintain the narrative of the independent working woman.
Right.
Well, I was watching American Pie the other day, and American Pie, I think, was
great movie.
Yeah, excellent choice.
The first movie I remember that kind of glorified MILFs in a way that probably launched MILFs to the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like American Pie and that song "Stacy's Mom."
Stacy's mom. I don't know.
Stacy's mom has got it going on. But this is after you were already in Japan, so.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We'll link the song. In,
well, let me tell you, I after I got to Japan, that's when I really started to think about MILFs, because those 22-year-olds who have kids are looking good.
Yeah.
I mean, they're wearing their heels and they got their hair
what was that girl's
dyed.
name? The one that you didn't get, but she had a kid and you always saw her at the club?
Oh, Kurumi baby with the baby. Oh, she was so good. Wow.
All right. Well, while Red Bull Q is fantasizing over there.
So good.
So, the truth.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Neil Strauss and him viewing his dad having a sexual fetish, and then the mum viewing the dad's sexual fetish as like a really bad thing, and then the dad viewing the sexual fetish as a bad thing, and that's why all the stuff is hidden everywhere. I mean, it's all kind of typical of the West. I don't know. My study of history is not that great recently, but it's always been kind of weird. It's either really, really open or really, really closed, and probably both at the same time. Because you have all these weird rules like...
Yeah, I agree with this both at the same time thing.
Well, you have all these weird rules where it's like, oh, chicks can do what they want. They shouldn't be shamed for being slutty. But then if guys do the same thing, they get labeled in like probably not great ways, or they're being told that they're like a bad guy.
Yeah, or, another example, I was looking at this Twitter conversation the other day, and basically this one girl, she posted a picture of her tits. She's just like a normal account, not like a porn account or anything, just like a normal chick. And she just posted this picture of her with the topless. And then another girl said something like, oh, wow, like, you're really brave to post that because, your tits are just like mine, but I always felt embarrassed by them. And, I think that's amazing that you posted them. And then another woman was like, oh, so you're saying that her tits aren't good and that's why it's brave for her to post them instead of saying that her tits are just really good? And then the girl's like, no, I'm just saying that I feel embarrassed about my tits. And it's like such a retarded argument. It's like, okay, like why does this suddenly have to be like a judgmental thing? It's like, girl posted her tits. Maybe some people like them. Maybe some people don't, whatever. But this girl, she's impressed. End of story. Like, it's like you're doing this deep dive into this chick's psychology when she just like said what she thought.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of that in the West. It's like, oh, you approached women. That means you're a sexual predator.
Yeah.
I think without like a hard need to produce in whatever way that means anything, you get a stronger amount of victim mindset-y people jumping around and doing a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you don't have constraints, like real constraints, then, you can waste time, a lot of time on things that just don't matter. When, obviously people didn't spend a lot of time worrying about, what their tits looked like when, there was mountain lions, circling the camp every night.
Yeah. On the topic of Neil's parents and that whole backstory and the truth, one thing that I found really interesting, have either of you guys read Marilyn Manson's autobiography?
No.
So Neil Strauss ghost wrote that for Marilyn Manson, or with her, Marilyn Manson. And that was excellent book. Very well written. Imagine that. But in the beginning of that book, he talks about, Marilyn Manson talks about how he grew up like living with his grandparents, I think, or like he visited his grandparents a lot. And his grandfather had all these really weird, like twisted sexual fetishes. Like, I can't remember exactly what they were, but it was like all this nasty shit. And like,
nasty by your standards?
Yeah, you have to consider how bad it must have been, right? But anyway, it was just described, like the way he was describing it was very interesting. And when I read The Truth, when Neil was talking about his dad, I was like, oh, this reminds me a lot of the Marilyn Manson book. And I wonder if one of the reasons why Neil was able to write this so well was because there was like a lot of similarity, right? Sure, they were able to bond over that. Yeah. That book is very good, by the way.
Yeah. I've heard it recommended before, certainly by you, but maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I think all Neil's books are good.
Did you read the one with the porn star?
Yeah.
Jenna Jameson?
Yeah, that was pretty good. How to Make Love Like a Porn Star.
Right.
But I read it a long time ago.
Is that
like right after.
Inform your career choices at all?
Maybe.
Maybe there's a certain girl that needs to read that book
since I was about 16.
Maybe you need to pass that on to a certain girl you went to Samui with.
Yeah, maybe.
Or maybe that's why she's so popular, because she does make love like a porn star.
I don't know. These are the questions.
Okay, so then in the next part of the book is when he goes into his swingers phase, which was hilarious in a whole other set of ways. It's like one book about how you could do everything wrong of sex and relationships. That's basically what The Truth was about. And there were definitely some good things in here, like some valuable things. The idea of intents versus rules, I thought was really good. And basically the idea is that when you're in an open relationship or a polyamorous relationship, or let's say a non-standard relationship, just that's much easier. If you're in a non-standard relationship, when you have a bunch of rules, the rules don't necessarily, you can circumvent the rules, or you can, what is the word? I can't remember English anymore.
Circumvent.
No, not that one. But when you like take a rule and you like follow it in practice, but not in spirit, there is a word for that, isn't there?
You're a lot smarter than me, so.
Oh,
maybe I don't know
good God. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, Martin, you must be smarter than me because you do one thing kind of well, as opposed to this other guy who does lots of things pretty fucking well. Anyway, but the point is that he basically says that one of the sections talks about how having rules around the relationship, like a certain Taiwanese girl that we know, they had like a bunch of, and I think we talked about this before in a previous podcast, and she was dating a guy, they had an open relationship, and there was all these rules, like they always had to have the same number of partners outside of the relationship. So if the girl had like been with 4 guys, let's say that year, and the other guy had only been with 1, she couldn't add on a new guy until he caught up with her. Right. So that's like an example of a rule. So, people come up with all kinds of weird rules that make them feel comfortable or they think might make them feel comfortable. But what he points out is that the intent is more important than the actual rule. So let's say in this case, the example that I gave, if the intent is that he wants to feel just as attractive as her, and, then the fact that, she's racking up massive numbers of dudes and he's not able to get as many girls, he maybe doesn't feel as attractive. So then maybe the intent should be, that not the rule shouldn't be, oh, you can't have sex with more people than me. It should be more about, you have to make sure that I always feel like I'm very attractive, something like that. And so I thought that was, and I'm fully on board with this. And I think that Asia tends to operate a lot more like this in general. In the West, especially the US, is a very litigious place. People care a lot about rules and about laws and following them. And in Asia, you don't really have to interact with laws, the rules. It's mostly about social convention, and the social conventions are basically around people being able to work together harmoniously. It's not about, well, this is the rules, you have to follow it. It's like, people won't like you if you don't act that way, or if you don't act in certain ways. So I thought that was really, really good. And I think that Kane, certainly has, a lot of this in the way he runs his relationship, about the intents. I don't think there's really many rules that you have, and I don't ever have rules.
Okay. Red Pill Q doesn't have rules. Everybody heard that here today.
Yeah, we all know that's...
I don't have rules for other people. I have rules for myself.
Once again, a hidden rule within the rule.
Yeah. Oh, dude. Oh, my God. Red Pill Q should write a book called The Rules, The Ultimate Rile.
The game, the truth, the rules.
Yeah, I could write a book called 1200 Rules for My Life.
Neil has a book called Rules of the Game, so you might like to.
Also, an enjoyable read.
Yeah,
yeah, and let me tell you the stories in there are very different than the stories in the first half of this book.
Let me just say that if you read and enjoyed Rules of the Game, you should go read Field Reports, because there's lots of great field reports that are very similar to many of the stories that Neil shares.
Just to randomly chime in with it, I remember some of the short stories from the Rules of the Game, and one in particular was Neil being really attracted to some 50 or 60-year-old neighbor he had.
Yeah, with the colostomy bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the classics.
So you have to look at that and wonder, what the fuck is going on?
I mean, when you're in pickup, you just do weird shit,
Well, I don't know. Actually, after reading the truth, I was wondering if he was trying to keep up with Dad.
It's pretty good.
Possible, I guess.
I mean, it's kind of like me. My dad told me when I was growing up, he was like, son, I never had to have sex in the back of a car. I always had a better solution. So I've never had sex in the back of a car, because I don't want to do worse than my dad.
Yeah, it'd be pretty bad.
Although I suppose that it could go the opposite way. It could be look at me, Dad. I'm only having sex in the car.
Yeah, fortunately, you have a rule in place to prevent that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that that idea of intents versus rules is really good, and the whole story that he has in there where he's involved with this girl, but she gives him a blowjob, but then she gets in trouble with her boyfriend because that's not allowed because of some detail of the rule or something. So that I thought is really good. The intents versus rules idea, and then also the idea of compersion. So compersion is this word that's emerged in the polyamory circles, and the idea is essentially getting pleasure out of your partner's pleasure. And it's interesting because, we don't have trouble doing that in a lot of other ways. If you give someone a gift, you feel happy that they like the gift. And, if you go, or if they have a great time hanging out with their friends, they come back and they tell you about it, then we don't have any problem with it in those cases. But when it comes to sex, it seems to be a lot harder for some people. Although, you had someone that seemed to really enjoy hearing about your extracurricular activities. HB Fist of the North Star?
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe currently you have someone who might be into that as well. I don't think you've actually tried, but there's some indication that it's possible.
Yeah, it's definitely, it could be on the way. Maybe. Yeah, we'll see. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah. So I don't know about myself. I've never really tried this sort of thing with any girls. I don't know how you always end up in these weird situations, McConnell.
I'm a lot more twisted than you.
That's true. That's definitely true.
First, step 1, be fucked up. Step 2, get fucked up. Hell yeah. 420. Blaze it.
I'm waiting for McConnell's redneck phase. Very much looking forward to it.
Although I will say that only one person in our household has a roll-up sweatshirt, and that's Red Bull Q.
That's true. And also the only person in the house to have rolled up in the house.
That's true.
Weirdly enough. Okay. The next thing that I thought was interesting was his exploration into the spiritual side of all of this.
Get ideagasms over here.
Right. And, he was just talking about how he entered these communities of people who were, doing all this spiritual stuff, but it was just a cover for them to have sex without feeling dirty, essentially. So that was pretty interesting. And also something that you could maybe learn from if you're psychopathic enough to run that.
We know a few people.
Yeah. So Kane, have you ever done that? Wait, isn't that a big part of when you were doing threesomes? Wasn't that kind of part of it?
Which particular aspect of it?
Making it a way to spiritually connect. I mean, I don't know. I'm asking. This isn't one of those questions where I'm accusing you in the question. This is actually just
be careful. Be very careful, Kane. Whenever he says something like that, it's always a way to lure you in deeper.
Yeah, that's probably true. I don't think I really added much of a spiritual element to it. I think it was mainly just like being dominant and adding in the right frames for how she could get a better situation with me. If you think otherwise and there's something I'm missing, I mean, feel free to mention it and I will try and think more.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you generally have, out of the three of us, you definitely have the most spiritual bent.
Really? Why do you think that?
Well, you
magic.
You like your magic trips.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay, I see what you mean.
So, so since you do, and I know that that's something that you have included as part of your relationships, I didn't know if that played into this aspect, or maybe it doesn't. It might not. It might play into the non-sexual side of the relationship only.
So it kind of does, but not in an overt way. So I would say it does, but in like a much more subtle way.
Oh, okay.
And if anyone else wants to know what that means, I guess like talk to me outside this and I can explain that.
Right. Okay. Awesome. And then also as part of the swingers group, he had there were two guys who were kind of the examples, or two types. So one was, this Corey Feldman, who was all about turning jealousy into passion. And then there was the other two guys who just really liked to watch other guys bang their girls. So I thought that was two different ways to enjoy non-standard relationship situations.
I thought about this a lot after reading, after reading How to Think More About Sex.
Right.
And he talks about how one of the ways that couples who have sort of gotten bored or used to each other can sort of rekindle their sex lives is by having, for example, if the girl goes and has sex with another guy and you're aware of it, or you're there experiencing it, or what, in whatever capacity, that can make you aware of all the things that you've forgotten about that person that turn you on. And Mating in Captivity, what's the author's name?
Esther Perel.
Yeah, Esther Perel also talks about this. There's like, I think, an entire section in that book about this.
Right.
And that was pretty interesting. And, I think probably like, yeah, I'd like never considered that before. And I think as you have relationships that are longer and longer, yeah, probably that's something that I would maybe experiment with, or it's a tool that I would maybe be interested in using at some point. But I never considered that until reading that book and then Esther Perel's book and then The Truth. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, a lot of people seem to be using this.
So what did you think about this section? This is where he went to the there's a few scenes, right? There's the party he went to in like Vegas or something. And then there was like when he went to Germany.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I have something very interesting to say about the Germany part. So, we read that section when we did the book club call, and I was just like, oh yeah, this is interesting. I recently met up with a guy from Germany, and he said that he went to a sex party in Germany. And he said he was describing it to me. And it was exactly like what Neil described in the book. And I was like, oh, wow, I guess that's just what it's like. He was like, oh, it's just exactly like you would imagine. And he was like describing all these things. And it was like exactly how Neil had described it. And I was like, oh, got to check that out at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it was also similar to my experience, not in Germany, but, when I went to like the swingers.
Yeah, I think it was somewhat similar to that too. But the way that this guy described it, it was even more like what Neil described in the book. Like,
right.
It was really
in the Neil Strauss situation, it was a much bigger thing.
Yeah, right.
It was a much bigger event, and most of them didn't really know each other. Yeah. Right. So it was more anonymous or random, or maybe it's more exciting.
And I mean, in Japan, they just don't have the space to host that large of an event.
Well, I was in Singapore where they they have the space, but it's too expensive.
Right.
And it was also quite like that where it's very, but, and what was interesting was for when I read that was how much he could enjoy that situation.
Neil?
Yeah.
What can you describe more what you mean? And are you asking for my specific opinion on this?
No. I was just saying I thought it was interesting because I compared it to my own experience and I didn't feel that way at all. Sure. Yeah, that's the thing that was interesting for me was the fact that he enjoyed that so much, and for me it was quite the opposite.
Yeah, I think
where just case, random mouth was exciting for him, whereas for me, doesn't really do much.
Yeah, I definitely could see the excitement. I think for me,
of course you could.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you got to be twisted to enjoy all this shit. But for me, I think with the sex, like with the swingers club that I've been to, or happening club, if you will, Japanese terminology. The most exciting thing about it for me is the performance aspect, right? And the live exhibitionist aspect. That's definitely the most exciting part for me, for sure. And I think that's the part that's exciting to me. I don't think the random mouth aspect would be as exciting, although it might be. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I don't have this performative aspect to my sex the way that you do.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess it's performative for me. It's more like the American Psycho performative, where I just like to look in the mirror.
That's really good. Yeah, I love how Red Bull Q's like, McConnell, you're so twisted. You're such a bad boy. Meanwhile, he's comparing himself to American Psycho.
Just the part where he looks at himself in the mirror. Just that part.
Shaming you, McConnell.
I know. I'm going to get dick picked later.
So remind me what happened in Germany. I vaguely remember Neil going to some party and taking some sort of drug. I don't remember much else about the Germany stuff.
Oh, those are two different stories. So the drug party was the one in Vegas. I think it was in Vegas.
Yeah, it was in Vegas, yeah.
And then the Germany one was when he went there and he was just like, oh yeah, I heard there's all this stuff going on. Because I guess after being in the polyamory community, he met girls, some girl in Germany, and he went to visit her or something like that.
Okay. And what was the sex party there like?
I don't know because I didn't. I mean, basically, it just seemed like it was a lot of people. It was a really big event, and there was everybody fucking everybody, basically. And it seemed like it was a very sensory overloading experience. I don't know if Red Bull Q wants to add anything else to that description.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really remember it that deeply. So let me see. I'm trying to flip through the book right now and to see if I have some notes about it, but I don't think I do. But basically, all I basically remember is that he like went with. Oh, right. He went with one girl. He was with one girl there, and she waited at the hotel room, right? And then he went out with this other girl.
That's right.
And the girl didn't really want to go to the one girl who waited for him. She wasn't really interested in going. She just wanted to be with Neil.
Yeah.
So she kind of just went along. And then, so this other girl was like, yeah, whatever. Okay, we're going to go to this sex party. So why don't you come? And he's like, yeah, sure. Or the sex club. And, he basically just describes going in and, what the atmosphere was like. And, it was a very kind of eyes wide shut kind of scene, except no masks. And, and he was just saying that, these people that he'd just been walking around with and he had dinner with, suddenly, they just were, all naked. And, for him, it was pretty surprising or, that everyone was naked and, everyone just started fucking and sucking everybody. And he was, surprised by it, but, basically they just included him and he felt that he fit right in. And then I think when he went back to his hotel room later, I think maybe he felt like a little bit guilty about the fact that she wasn't included. But the thing was that the girl didn't really seem to care at all. And so that was also like something that weirded him out because he felt that she should have been bothered, but she wasn't. Right. So the drug party one. Did you guys remember that one?
Yeah, I remember that. That's one of the funniest stories in the book for sure. It's definitely one of the most comedic scenes.
Right, because he ends up not actually sleeping with anybody, right?
Right, because he's just like so fucked up.
Right, off of, what was he taking?
I can't remember. Oh, GHB.
Oh, GHB. Okay, right. And he was just really fucked
up. There was a peanut butter scene, right?
Oh, you mean peanut butter and doggy? No.
I thought he does something really gross when he's on GH. Oh no, he's like eating chocolate. That's what it is, right? And doesn't he like take the chocolate out of his mouth or something? I can't remember exactly the scene.
I don't remember.
Funny.
I don't remember this.
Anyway, it was funny.
I just remember that he met that girl, Sage, that he was like really
right. It's during that, yeah.
Right. I can't remember. I just remember he was like talking and saying like weird stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Right. He was just doing all this weird shit, and then it made me think like, oh, that's why I don't do this stuff.
Right. Whereas Vision was like, when he read that part, he was really excited. He's like, oh man, I want to do this. He's like really excited to go to this party. Okay. And then I think the next section was when he tried doing his circle. And this was also very comedic, but not because funny things happen. It was comedic because at least the way he describes what happened, it showed him as having like no relationship management skills at all, which isn't that surprising in some ways because in general, the way that Western world works is that guys don't really need to have relationship management skills because the girls are kind of the ones driving everything. So it's not really that surprising.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this is like bigger than the West, though. I mean, how many pickup instructors or companies do you know that teach relationship management?
Well, you don't have to manage relationships when you let the girl run everything, which is what most of them seem to do. Bang a bunch of girls, and then the ones that stick around are the ones that you date.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That I'm saying it's not just a Western thing, because I think in the West it's normal to have the girl run everything.
Oh, and you're saying that you think that
I don't think we know any instructors worldwide who, or not that many anyway, who actually teach relationship management. I think it's just one of those skills that's often overlooked when people come into pickup, ironically enough.
Yeah, I guess that's true. They're kind of considered to be separate spheres for some reason. There's people who teach about relationships, and then there's people who teach pickup and...
Yeah, and there's a lot of the relationship coaching is very, very standard mainstream stuff. It's not like, how to have a non-standard setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I could throw in one thing here that I thought was interesting. Early on when Neil went to the clinic, he got all uppity and disliked all of the rules.
Oh, you mean the rehab clinic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So he didn't like all the rules that were being imposed on him, and he was like pushing back in various ways. It's kind of interesting then that his major problem with his relationships all throughout the book, both in terms of being with Ingrid and in terms of the having a circle thing, all really came down to him kind of not liking the rules or thinking he had to follow the rules and agreeing to rules that just like messed everything up or suggesting rules that were just dumb.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, that this is kind of fits in with kind of the American problem of not being able to look at people as they are and just looking at them as you wish they would be and assuming they're going to act in accordance with that ideal. So when in his circle relationships, one of the things there was a lot of mistakes. So first of all, you remember that he basically he got all three girls together all at the same time instead of like starting with one and then adding in the next one and then adding in the next one. So he was having like three separate relationships at the same time rather than having one relationship and then him and the first girl having a relationship with the third girl and then him and the two girls having the relationship with the third girl. Yeah, that's what I think I said that right.
You said third girl twice, so he meant second
damn it.
girl.
Okay, here we go.
Girl, yeah.
Okay, so the way it should have worked is him having a relationship with a girl, and then him and the first girl having a relationship with the second girl, and then him, the first and second girl having a relationship with the third girl.
Yeah,
but
like they're all one unit at any given point.
Right, but the way he did it, it was like him having three relationships with girls that all lived together. And so that's why it was a total disaster. Because each of... Sorry, go ahead.
I think, if you go back and listen to our podcast with Ellie...
Yeah.
Yeah, she talks about how her and her man, they do it that way, where it's like the two of them as one unit are trying to find a extra girl.
Right. The other thing is that he was really... he was just really pushing his own agenda so hard that he didn't really notice the issues the girls were having, or what was.
We know some people in our own community who would have this problem.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too just now when I was saying it.
Yeah.
And he had this idea that the girls are going to be able to take care of their own emotions.
Ha ha. You get a Chris move in there.
Maybe we should get a Chris Smoove soundboard. For those of you guys who don't know, Chris Smoove is he's a YouTuber and he does some playthroughs and he has a lot of funny one-liners basically.
You could thank us later, Chris. Your channel just got 2 subscribers.
Sure, he's going to notice them in addition to the 15 million he already has. Oh, you guys must be the ones heard about me through the Pick a Page podcast. Welcome.
Although, if Chris Smoove is listening to this, if you want to come on and fuck with us, get an interview.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah, I'd be down for that. And the other thing, so he didn't really do so he just basically the girls are going to show up and everything was going to work out. He there was no planning at all. He's like, everyone's going to show up. We're just going to have threesomes all the time and foursomes or whatever. And it wasn't like that at all. It was none of the girls got enough time with him. The girls he didn't even do things to for the girls to become closer. He should have done, when you go to summer camp or something and they take you on those retreats and you do all those weird trust building exercises. Yeah. He needed to do something like that.
He really should have watched Ideagasm's DVD series. That would have been very helpful.
Yeah.
Minus the chakras part, but everything else.
Yeah, right. Minus the chakras part. So that was a really total disaster. And at every step, I think when I was reading it, and I think McConnell and Kane also felt what is this dumbass doing?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, just to throw it out there, if Neil Strauss is ever listening to this podcast, feel free to come and sign up with a discount for the relationship seminar. We can help.
I don't think he needs a discount.
Yeah.
We'll just say that, and then he'll get here, and then he'll pay us lots of money.
Yeah. Yeah, our course is $10,000.
That goes for mystery, too.
We'll give you 10% off.
Yeah.
So anything that you guys wanted to bring up or wanted to note about during his circle life attempt?
I don't know. I think it was a really good. I think one of the really good things about the book is that basically he goes between all these different extremes. Like he's like an extreme phase A, extreme phase B, and it's all like different forms of extremism. And I think that's exactly how people kind of shoot themselves in the foot with any kind of relationship, is they just go too deep into like one thing rather than trying to have like a balanced and harmonious relationship. You know, I think that's like one of the good lessons of the truth in general, is that like if you try to max out on any one thing, it's going to cause a lot of problems.
Or maybe Neil Strauss's life in general as presented in books.
Sure. Yeah.
I still just find the whole situation very confusing, because if you get a bunch of girls to agree to live together in a polyamorous situation, having some sort of sweaty fuckfest wouldn't be very difficult. So how that can be fucked up that badly is really suspicious to me.
Well, I mean, the fact that they all like didn't know each other, I mean, it was just a bad setup from the beginning. I mean, he just like had this fantasy about everything just automatically working out, and he didn't seem to think at all about how it could go wrong. He's like, here's 3 girls, they love sex, and they love me, yeah, and they also love other women. So what could possibly go wrong? I think he's thinking of it like, well, I mean, he as like, it was like as a guy, right? I mean, because as a guy, you're like, oh, there's a hot girl, I'll bang her. So, you know, I guess that's how gay guys are about guys too. And I think he sort of thought women were going to be like that. Like, oh, there's a hot girl, I want to bang her. But women are still women, and they have all their other like psychological and emotional stuff around sex that, you know, guys don't have until, you know, pretty much don't have, or don't have to the same extent.
Yeah, so it still seems a bit weird to me. I mean, I get what you're saying, but if he's got the money and the resources and the experience in all of this, it's just weird that it was put together this badly. Because it's not just like, oh, okay, women are different. It's also that he has run various companies. He's got experience at managing people. So it's...
Well, it never ceases to amaze me how bad people are at extrapolating lessons they learn in one field to another field.
Yeah, that's true.
That seems to be like a really difficult skill for people to integrate.
Yeah, I mean, I was as baffled as you are, Kane, when I read that. I was just like sitting there and like, what the fuck?
Yep.
But I think, you know, if you read the, you know, in the book, The Game, when he had like the kind of a similar situation, I guess maybe he just didn't notice,
Yeah, I think that's what's happening.
Or maybe the girls just, you know, were just not as good, so they just went along with it.
Maybe.
I got a tangential question for you guys.
Okay.
You can date any one girl that Neil Strauss has dated in one of his books. Who do you choose?
I don't remember them all.
Yeah, I don't know that I remember them well enough. Okay, but definitely not the girl he ended up with at the end of
The Game.
Yeah, I guess it would have to be. I was going to, you know, I don't know. Somehow Sage always seemed kind of manly, and I don't know if that's just because I know another Sage who, or if it's just the way he describes her, where she seems kind of masculine. But I think one of the girls that he had in his circle was probably the ideal one. I don't remember which one it was, though. What about you?
I don't know. I'm still thinking.
Probably the South American chick that was doing, I think, was the one in the threesome in The Game when he was doing the dual massage induction thingy.
Oh, right. Yeah, his description of that girl was pretty good.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of, too. I mean, it was one of those girls. I just don't remember which one exactly. If you were more autistic, you would have made a list of all of Neil Strauss's girls.
Exactly, yeah.
Maybe you need to get some more vaccines, McConnell.
Everybody needs to get more vaccines.
Yeah, but the vaccine's called autism. That's the autistic belief about vaccines.
I don't think McConnell needs more. I think he's had enough.
Fair.
I think we got enough autism for McConnell. Okay, yeah. So then the next stage was doing the bi wing thing with Sage.
It just makes you think of the Sage in our community when you say that. It's a very different bi wing thing. If be a much more gentlemanly experience.
And I have a list of all the mistakes that he made, apparently. So he neglects women and their emotions. And I guess he chalks this up to his dad and like how his dad like shut himself off from like his mom's problems, right? I think that's what he said. He gets involved deeply with women he doesn't really know. Now, this is, I think, actually, in most people just consider this to be normal, right? Where, you know, that's what falling in love is all about, right? You like meet a girl or a girl meets a guy and they project onto them lots of stuff, and then they like integrate this person fully into their life, and then
cut themselves off from everything else.
Right. And then they're like,
Next
3 years later,
stuck in a well, can't get out.
Wait, what?
You know, a well. You're like if you're stuck in a well, it's very
okay.
difficult to get out.
Oh, okay.
The water, you know,
Right.
a dry well that doesn't have water in it.
Right. So I just started thinking of Batman when you said that. You know, he like falls down the well and he's like trapped down there. And
I prefer a different superhero. Yeah, Spider-Man.
Okay. Yeah, so I think he chalked it up to like his like what he saw with his dad and his mom, and how his like dad didn't really like deal with his mom's emotional stuff at all. But then again, and then I didn't list exactly what they were, but he makes major progression mistakes. Oh, yeah. He makes major progression mistakes. I mean, it's basically he made all the mistakes he made when he tried to do the circle, but this time he did it with one girl instead of 3 at the same time. So, you know, like we talk a lot about progressing your relationships, right? And relationships develop over time. And over time, as you get closer to someone, theoretically, they're willing to do more and more for you, or, you know, experience more discomfort for you, or whatever it is. And when you are moving things along, you have to give the person time. And a lot of times people don't do that. You know, they think, well, if you love me, you'll do this. And it's like, wait, but, you know, my mom is really sick in the hospital. I kind of think I should go and visit them. Right. Like right now. So, you know, that's an example where people, you know, can put some hard expectations on the behavior of their partner, when that might be okay at some point in the relationship, but, you know, it's too early. You could be asking too much. Yeah, so I thought that whole thing with Sage redheaded Sage was all very weird, you know, and he still had like lots of problems, and he was like, I don't know, he didn't really seem to like her that much, and yeah, it was all very bizarre. Do you remember a lot about that, Kane? Because you're the one who's had the most similar experience to Neil.
Yeah, you spent more time with Sage than me and Red Bull.
What did you think about this part of the book?
The threesome stuff?
Yeah, the Sage part.
Honestly, I don't really remember this part that well. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what would you like me to elaborate on in terms of Sage?
Nothing in particular, just thoughts in general about, you know, how he dealt with that, and, you know, yeah. Because, I mean, you know, I thought that probably you would have the most insight.
Refresh me as to what happened between them. I remember that she was a chick he dated, and they had like an open thing going for a bit.
Yeah, and they would go out and pick up girls together, and I think this is and yes, that's right. And she had like a drug problem, kind of. She like did a lot of like cocaine, and she drank a lot, and so she'd have like all these emotional outbursts. And remember, he had that time when it was him and her and like these twins, and the girl was talking about how she'd done so much cocaine that like she'd like had a hole in her nose.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
And so it was just about how being in this relationship with her kind of wrecked his life. And instead of living like a healthy life where he was productive and doing stuff, it was really just a party life. It was just like partying and banging random chicks with Sage.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just need a better filtering process, basically.
I remember those twins where one of them was nuts or did something really crazy and they had to like kick them out.
Yeah. I don't remember the details, but that was kind of when he realized, okay, I'm really going down the wrong path. And he sort of thought, okay, I think Sage isn't good for me.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't really know what to comment on this other than maybe I think if you're going to get deeply involved with someone, you have to view it as you have your version of reality, they have theirs. And when you're mixing it together, you want to make it, you're sure you're doing it with someone who's adding to your reality and improving it. So kind of like if you think about moving in with somebody, if you have a nice house and things are well put together and then you go and see this other person's house and it looks like it's well put together, but inside they're like a hoarder and they have a cat they haven't taken out in like a year and it's all messy and fucked up. If you're like, hey, you look good, let's live together, it's going to be an utter shit fight, or it's at least going to be very incompatible with how you live. So I think that only really matters if you're having that sort of relationship with somebody. And that, I don't know, I mean, I haven't thought about this part of this enough, but potentially things in the West are a bit too focused on maybe the label and how things should be rather than how things actually are. And this is kind of evident of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That, people, they tend to think in the West that, if you love the other person, then everything will work out, whereas in Asia, there's definitely a much more practical perspective to it, where people are thinking, yeah, we need to think about the financial situation. Yeah, we need to think about the family background and not in terms of the, being judgmental about them, but more in terms of like, are they compatible? Are they a good match for how our family sees things and our family's values? So, that, they think through a lot of those things. And I also feel like in Asia, when you think practically about your relationships, people think that's a good thing. Whereas in the West, they think, oh, well, if you're thinking like that, then that makes you kind of like
a psychopath.
Yeah. Essentially. It's like, yeah, because I don't want to have my life be a mess. It's like, well, there's this optimism, I guess, that everything can work out if you just love each other enough.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So in the end of the book, he goes back to Ingrid and he thinks, oh, she was really good for me in my life. And he does that bachelor party funeral thing where he buries his bachelor gaming life. And then they get married and then now he's divorced.
Yeah.
So that's the truth.
Yep. Yeah. I think we listened to that podcast. One of the more interesting things that Neil said was now he's kind of in the best position because he's already been married. He already has a kid, one kid?
Yeah, one kid.
Anyway,
maybe he has two, I don't know.
Yeah. He already has had a kid. He's been married. He's already had lots of sex with lots of girls. And so he doesn't really need like any of those individual things. So he's not like seeking them out. So he can kind of just do whatever he wants now. I thought that was a very interesting perspective, actually.
Well, Taisho in Japan, he says that a lot of the happiest guys he knows are guys who are married, who are divorced with kids. And I think that's the same thing because basically, when you don't have kids or when you haven't been married yet, you're wondering, oh, should I get married? Should I have kids?
Right.
And, this is kind of on a time, like it's on a
Right,
clock,
right.
right? You have like a certain amount of time before you have to do those things. And when you've already done them, you're off the clock, right?
Yeah, I think it's I just never considered that perspective before. And I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah. When I had, Red Pill Philosopher in the relationship seminar, I was telling him like, yeah, look, you already have kids, so you don't have to like think about whether you should do that. You can just not do that. And again, if you don't want to, and that's fine because you already have it. Whereas like in my case, I don't have kids yet. So it's always this thing. Should I have kids with this girl? Should I have kids with this girl? Should I have kids with this girl? Should I have kids with all of them? And I guess, Kane, you're in that situation too, where you kind of are wondering, well, is it a good idea? Should I do it? Right.
Yeah, I guess.
Whereas if you already had them, then you would just be like, well, I have them and you just have to deal with it.
Yeah, that's true.
So the decision's already behind you. So now it's just about continuing through life. Okay, well, do you have any closing thoughts about the game? I mean, about the truth?
I always have thoughts about the game. One of the greatest books ever written.
Yeah.
So there is a quote or a highlight here that I think I'll read that is reasonably good to end on, which says, most people seem to believe that if a relationship doesn't last until death, it's a failure. But the only relationship that's truly a failure is one that lasts longer than it should. The success of a relationship should be measured by its depth, not by its length. So I think that it's a pretty good quote, other than you could change out the word length for a whole bunch of other different things too. So for example, the label or that's the only one I'll stick with for the moment.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where a lot of people get really caught up in a very unhelpful way.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Which is one of the reasons, for the listeners, we're pretty anti labels for this exact reason. So we don't think it's an accurate representation of what's really going on.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good quote to end on.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for being on the call, and thanks to our listeners.
Yeah, be sure to subscribe to this podcast if you like it, and go and
or even if you don't like it.
Yeah. Also, especially if you don't like it.
Yeah, if you don't like it, send it around to a bunch of your friends. Tell them how much you dislike this podcast and how we're a bunch of misogynist pigs.
Right. Make YouTube videos where you call us out and are really mean. And also sign up for our newsletter, because we put a lot of work into the newsletter, and there's a lot of really good free content and stuff on there. So you can go to pickupasia.com and sign up for the newsletter. We don't sell very hard in the newsletter. It's mostly just free shit. So
that's true.
There's also lots of content there that you can dislike if you dislike this podcast.
Yeah. There's no shortage of things to dislike about us or our business. So
yeah. So dislike as much of it as you can.
Yeah.
The more you know, the more you have to dislike.
And you know what Cat Williams says? Haters don't hate you, they hate good shit.
Also, we will really, really appreciate your hatred if you send us money and sign up for our courses.
Yeah.
Right. And then hate the courses.
That's the most pure form of disliking us.
Yeah.
Right. After you take it, you can tell all your friends about how you hated it. We'd appreciate that. Okay. Great. Bye-bye.